The first time I noticed her, she was just a silhouette in the rain, a golden shape at the edge of my porch. Her fur was soaked, and her ribs were visible through her thin body. Initially, I thought she was just another stray dog, a common sight in Tennessee. However, as she lifted her head, I saw something different in her eyes. Not just hunger or fear, but a quiet plea for help. She took a step forward, hesitated, and then seemed to reconsider. That's when I spotted the others. In the dim light of my porch, tucked into a shallow dip by the steps, were 5 tiny puppies. They huddled together, shivering and waiting. I felt a lump in my throat. While I had seen many stray dogs before, I had never witnessed a mother approaching someone's doorstep to ask for assistance. That's exactly what she was doing. There were no barks or growls, just a silent hope that I would understand her predicament. I crouched down slowly and reached out my hand. She flinched but didn't run away. Our eyes met, and in those weary, desperate eyes, I realized I couldn't just walk away from this situation. I might not have known what lay ahead, but it was clear. She had chosen me as her helper. The rain had lessened to a mist, and the air felt heavy against my skin as I knelt on the porch. I decided to name her Rosie in that moment. She watched me intently, her body tense yet still. The puppies, all curled up in a small pile, let out soft whimpers as they breathed. They seemed to be just a few weeks old, their fur still patchy and their eyes barely open. I took my time. I knew that rushing might scare her off, and it seemed like she was completely worn out. I went inside, grabbed an old towel and some leftover chicken from the fridge. When I came back outside, she was still there, her body half turned as if she might escape, but she stayed put. I placed the food down and stepped back. In just a moment, she took a cautious step forward, sniffed the air, and began to eat quickly, as if unsure of when she might find her next meal. The sound of her eating stirred the puppies, some stretching their little legs, while others let out faint cries. Immediately, Rosie turned to them, licking their heads affectionately to make sure they were still safe. That's when I truly noticed how thin she was. Her ribs poked out, reminiscent of an old barn frame, and her coat was a patchwork of dirt and neglect. It made me wonder how long she had been wandering alone. How many homes had she approached before reaching mine? I took a deep breath, rubbing the back of my neck. Taking in a dog wasn't in my plans, let alone 6. Life was already a lot to manage for me in this old house, where the days seemed to blend together in a quiet haze. But when I saw her curling protectively around her puppies, even while clearly malnourished, I realized I didn't have a choice. "All right, girl," I said softly, crouching down once more. "Let's get you inside." I wasn't sure she would cooperate, but as I picked up the first puppy, she simply stood there watching. There was no growl, no panic, just trust. In that moment, I understood she had come to me for help, and I couldn't turn her away. Getting them inside was the simple part. Building their trust would be a greater challenge. My old house had always been filled with quiet sounds, the wind rustling through trees and the occasional creak of the wooden floors. But now there was a weight of uncertainty in the air. Rosie remained near the doorway, her body low, ears twitching at each new sound. The puppies, too weak to notice much, lay huddled on the towel I had laid out by the fireplace. They barely moved as I dried them off, their little bellies round, a testament to Rosie's selflessness in the face of hunger. I set a bowl of water and some food nearby, keeping my distance as Rosie approached them cautiously. She was hesitant, tail tucked, eyes darting between me and the door. One wrong move, and she could bolt. Sitting on the floor, I tried to appear smaller and less intimidating. "You're safe now," I said softly, unsure if my words were meant for her or for my own reassurance. She didn't move closer, but she also didn't run away. For now, that was progress. The puppies, however, were another story. As the night went on, their little personalities began to shine through. Boone, the largest, was the first to wobble towards me, sniffing my fingers before flopping onto my leg, as if I were just another piece of furniture. Daisy quickly followed, her tiny tail wagging as she nuzzled into my sleeve. One by one, the others joined, climbing onto me and burrowing into my shirt for warmth, their trust offered freely and eagerly. Rosie stayed back, observing from a distance. Her puppies had settled against me, yawning and stretching as they made themselves comfortable. Yet Rosie hesitated. I could see the conflict in her eyes, She wanted to be near her young ones, but was unsure about the stranger in their midst. I chose not to push her. Trust is something that can't be forced. Sitting on the floor, I felt the warmth of the fire casting soft flickers of light around the room. The air was filled with the earthy scent of damp fur mixed with wood smoke, marking a blend of the familiar and the new. As Rosie finally curled up in the far corner, her gaze remained fixed on me. I understood then that this wasn't merely about providing shelter. It was also about showing her that I would be there for them. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a sound that sent a chill through me, a sharp, panicked yelp. The fire had dimmed, leaving only a few glowing embers. The puppies lay still beside me, their tiny bodies gently rising and falling in sleep, but Rosie was now alert, standing with her ears up and her body tense. Another sound broke the quiet, a rustling followed by the unmistakable snap of a twig. Moving carefully to avoid waking the puppies, I pushed myself up. Rosie let out a low growl, her focus fixed on the front door, not on me. My breath slowed as my mind raced through potential threats. Out here in the isolation, the only visitors were those I invited, and I hadn't invited anyone. I crept towards the window, peeking through the old, warped glass. Initially, all I saw was the dark outline of trees and the gravel road fading into the distance. But then, illuminated by the faint porch light, a shadow moved. Someone was out there. Rosie growled again, deeper this time, positioning herself protectively between me and the door. It was clear she didn't trust this presence, and neither did I. My heart pounded in my ears as I cautiously opened the door, just enough to glimpse outside. The night was calm, with the wind rustling the leaves and carrying the smell of damp earth. The darkness played tricks on my eyes until, just beyond the porch steps, I noticed something small. It sat there as if placed intentionally. I frowned, stepping forward despite Rosie's sharp bark, which seemed a warning against moving closer. Still, my curiosity urged me on. Kneeling down, I reached for the object, my fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface of a crate. As the porch light brightened the area, I felt a tight knot in my stomach. There, in the corner of the crate, was a puppy. It was much smaller than Rosie's puppies, barely half their size, trembling uncontrollably. Its damp fur was matted with dirt, and around its neck was a ragged red ribbon, loosely tied, as if someone had hurriedly done it. This wasn't simply a stray that had wandered up. Someone had left it here intentionally. I was struck by an unsettling question. Why would someone abandon it? And more unsettlingly, who had done this? Rosie barked sharply, her body tense as she positioned herself protectively between me and the crate. I cautiously lifted the plastic latch, and the little puppy flinched, pressing itself against the back of the crate as if it wanted to vanish. Its ribs stuck out beneath its tangled fur, and its wide eyes were filled with something I recognized. Not just fear, but a deep sense of resignation. Trying to calm the uneasiness bubbling inside me, I realized this was not just an abandoned puppy. Someone had deliberately placed it on my porch in the dead of night and then vanished. I glanced towards the trees, half expecting to see someone watching us, but there was only darkness and the gentle rustling of leaves, punctuated by the distant chirping of crickets. Rosie's low growl kept me grounded. With deliberate slowness, I reached into the crate. The puppy shrank back but didn't bite or struggle. Instead, it quivered against my fingers as I lifted it out. It felt freezing and surprisingly light. I could feel its fragile bones beneath its skin, a clear indication that it hadn't eaten properly for quite some time. It was a tiny life hanging on, instinctively seeking warmth in my hands. Rosie's growl softened, yet she remained alert, her eyes fixed on this new arrival. The other puppies stirred in their slumber, entirely unaware of what had just happened. I took a step back inside, nudging the door close with my foot, but Rosie stayed where she was. I knelt down again, and her gaze shifted between me and the small creature I held, revealing her internal conflict. "I didn't bring it here," I said softly, almost to myself, "but it looks like it's ours now." After a moment of hesitation, Rosie stepped closer, her nose twitching as she greeted the small bundle in my hands. Her body relaxed a bit, and I could sense that she recognized something in the little pup. It might not have been her own, but it was abandoned just like she was, two strays brought together. I gently placed the pup down next to the others, observing as it curled up, too tired to fight back. Rosie gave its tiny head a soft lick, just a cautious gesture, before looking back at me. That night, I had taken in 6 dogs. Now I had 7. Somewhere out there, someone had made this possible. Morning arrived slowly. The sky changed from dark blue to a soft gray as light filtered through the trees. I hadn't slept much. Each time I tried, my mind returned to that crate on my porch, to the little pup nestled beside Rosie's litter. I couldn't shake the question. Who had left it there, and why? Rosie seemed to have settled, though she still watched me closely as I moved around the house. The puppies, along with the new arrival, snuggled together on the old towel I had spread out for them, their small bodies finding warmth in each other. I crouched down, rubbing sleep from my eyes as I took a closer look at the newcomer. It was smaller, weaker than the rest. While the others squirmed toward Rosie during the night, nudging at her belly, this one barely stirred. Was it just tired, or was there something more serious going on? I felt the need for answers, and I knew I needed help. Reaching for my phone, I found the one person I could count on to answer at any hour: Eli. He was a local vet and an old friend, always willing to lend a hand without too many questions. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Jake, do you know what time it is?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the clock. "I could really use a favor." There was a pause, followed by the sound of him waking up. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that barks," I replied. "A mother dog showed up on my porch last night with 5 pups, and then someone—" I hesitated, recalling that plastic crate and feeling the unease wash over me again. "Someone left another one at my door, in the middle of the night, just dropped it and vanished." The silence stretched between us before Eli sighed. "Okay, I'll be there in an hour." By the time he arrived, the house was filled with the smell of coffee and damp fur. Rosie tensed as he stepped through the door, positioning herself protectively in front of her pups, but Eli had a knack for handling animals. He crouched low, moving slowly, and waited for the right moment. After a moment, she sniffed the air, gave a soft huff, and settled back down, but her eyes remained fixed on him. "Wow," Eli said quietly, running his hand through his hair as he observed the situation. "She's really had a tough time." Kneeling beside the puppies, he carefully checked each one with practiced hands. When he reached the newcomer, his expression changed. "This one doesn't belong to the same litter. Can you see the difference in size and fur?" I nodded in agreement. "I see that, but someone brought it here." Eli stayed focused on his task, his fingers gently exploring the tiny ribs and fragile bones under thin skin. Eventually, he looked up at me. "This one is weak and malnourished. It might be sick, or it could just need some time. Hard to say for sure. We'll do what we can." I felt a knot in my stomach. "What about the others?" "They're doing all right. A day or 2 more without food would have been tough, but they're strong." He glanced at Rosie, his tone softer now. "She kept them alive, even if it meant going hungry herself." That thought tightened something inside me. I looked at Rosie, noting how she protectively curled around her little ones, even the unfamiliar pup. Eli finished packing his kit and stood up. "I'll bring some formula for the little one, just in case. But Jake," he paused for a moment. "Any idea who left it?" I didn't have the answer. All I knew was that this situation wasn't resolved. Someone had arrived quietly in the night to leave that crate on my porch. If they'd done it once, who knew what else they might do? Eli left soon after, promising to check in later with supplies. His last question lingered in my thoughts. Who had placed that puppy on my porch? And why didn't they just knock? The uncertainty weighed heavily on me, but my immediate focus had to be on Rosie and her pups. The little one with the red ribbon still lay curled up and barely moved. While the others wriggled and snuggled closer to Rosie, this one seemed to be alone, breathing slowly, maybe too slowly. I dipped my finger into the warm formula Eli had left and brushed it against its tiny mouth. At first, there was no response. Then, a faint flicker of a tongue, a weak attempt to latch on. It wasn't a lot, but it was a start. Rosie watched me with quiet suspicion, her dark eyes conveying uncertainty. I understood that she didn't fully trust me, not the way her puppies did, but she hadn't stopped me either. That was an encouraging sign. I lowered myself gently near her, keeping my distance to give her space. I wanted to make it clear to her that I wasn't planning to take her puppies. I was here to help. As the hours went by, I unexpectedly began to feel responsible. I had convinced myself this was just a temporary situation, that I was merely ensuring their safety while I figured out a plan. But sitting on the worn wooden floor, watching Rosie curl protectively around her little ones as their soft whimpers echoed in the quiet house, I realized that was not true. This wasn't temporary. I had always preferred living alone, but suddenly, the thought of an empty house felt lonelier than ever. The presence of the puppies, even the frail one, had transformed my once quiet space into something vibrant and alive. And Rosie, despite her initial hesitance, had chosen my porch as her last hope. The pressing question was I prepared for this level of commitment? Taking them in wasn't just about feeding them. It meant a lot more. It meant I would need to provide for them, vet visits, training, finding them loving homes, and possibly facing the failure of not being able to manage it all. Moreover, it meant genuinely caring for them, knowing that I might not be able to keep them forever. Rosie lifted her head and met my gaze, and for the first time she held my look. Perhaps she sensed my thoughts. Maybe she was asking the same question. What happens now? I didn't have an answer at that moment. But I was certain of one thing. I wasn't going to walk away. In the following days, we began to settle into a routine, albeit an uneasy one. Rosie started eating more, her ribs becoming less visible beneath her golden fur, and the puppies began taking wobbly steps to explore their surroundings. Even the smallest one, the one with the red ribbon, seemed to gain some strength, though it still lagged behind the others. I took it upon myself to bottle feed that little one every few hours, carefully cradling its fragile body while it struggled to drink. Rosie watched each time, not interfering, but I could sense a change. She was starting to trust me. Just when it felt like we were finding our rhythm, a knot of unease returned to my stomach. It began with something minor. On the second night after Eli's visit, I found the gate to my property unlatched. At first, I dismissed it as my own oversight, but by the third time I realized something was amiss. Someone had been here. I decided to keep my shotgun by the door, not because I sought trouble, but because I wasn't about to be caught unprepared. Out here, folks don't just wander onto your property. If someone was sneaking around, they had a motive, and that motive likely involved Rosie and her puppies. The turning point arrived on the fourth night. I had just finished feeding the smallest puppy and was getting comfortable in my chair when Rosie suddenly shot up, her ears alert and body tense. Almost instantly, she let out a low growl, one I had never heard from her before. The puppies sensed her unease and huddled closer to her for warmth. I got to my feet, my heart racing, trying to listen carefully. Then I caught it. Footsteps. Slow and intentional, just outside the house. I tightened my grip on the shotgun and approached the window, my breathing shallow. The porch light illuminated the yard faintly, and for a moment, everything seemed still. Then I noticed it. A shadow moving between the trees at the edge of my property. "Hey!" I called out as I stepped onto the porch, my voice breaking the stillness. There was no response, just the sound of retreating footsteps vanishing into the woods. Rosie barked, her body tense beside me, but whoever it was, they had already slipped away. I lingered there for a while, staring into the darkness, my grip steady on the shotgun. This wasn't just a passerby. Someone had been watching us, and if they had come once, it was likely they would return. Turning back toward the house, I felt a heaviness in my chest. The puppies were safe, at least for now, but both Rosie and I knew we weren't alone anymore. The following morning revealed footprints. They weren't mine, and certainly not Eli's. Fresh imprints marked the damp earth just beyond the porch, too large for a coyote and too purposeful for someone merely passing through. Someone had been standing there watching. The thought made my stomach churn. Rosie had been restless all night, her ears flicking at every sound. She stayed close to the puppies, her body curled protectively around them. Even now, as I stood on the porch looking at those prints, she was right by my side, her dark eyes fixed on the same spot. "Yeah," I murmured, rubbing my jaw. "I don't like this either." I snapped a few photos with my phone and sent them to Eli. "Someone was here last night, found tracks, same person who left the pup." He replied almost instantly, "You need to file a report, Jake." I let out a sigh, running a hand across the back of my neck. What do I even say? That a mystery person is trespassing and leaving puppies on my porch? Yeah, he replied flatly, because that's exactly what's happening. I considered arguing, but he wasn't wrong. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. There was something more to consider. Someone had been nearby, perhaps too nearby. The thought that they were watching weighed heavily on my mind. It suggested they had an interest in these animals, and that is what truly unsettled me. Instead of reaching for my phone to call the sheriff right away, I decided to check the property. I surveyed the area for any signs of unwanted attention. I spotted a few broken branches along the tree line and some disturbed dirt next to the fence. These were subtle clues, but they indicated that someone had lingered longer than I was comfortable with. When I returned to the house, Rosie was waiting by the door, watching over the puppies curled up in the makeshift bed I had set up near the fireplace. The smallest pup, wearing a red ribbon, stirred weakly but was still holding on. I knelt beside them and gently ran my fingers over Boone and Daisy, the two strongest of the litter. In just a few days, I had begun to recognize their little quirks, how Scout was always the first to yawn, or how Millie tucked herself under her siblings when she slept. Then there was Rosie. She was not just guarding the puppies anymore, she was also watching me. The fear that had once filled her eyes had faded, replaced by a different emotion. Was it recognition? Perhaps even trust? I leaned back against the wall with a sigh. Looks like we're in this together now, huh? Rosie blinked at me and then gradually rested her head against my knee. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. I had initially thought I was the one helping them, but as I sat there surrounded by these tiny lives that depended on me, I began to wonder if I needed them just as much as they needed me. However, trust alone wouldn't resolve the bigger issue. Someone out there was still a threat, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever came next, I wouldn't be prepared for it. As the sun set behind the trees, I made a choice. I couldn't just wait for whoever was sneaking around my property to make their next move. I needed answers. Rosie and the pups were safe inside, nestled in the warm glow of the fireplace, but I couldn't shake the sense that time was short. I loaded up the truck and headed into town, my first stop being Eli's clinic. He took one look at me and sighed. "You look terrible." "Yeah, not much sleep lately," I admitted, leaning against the counter. "I need to find out if anyone's been searching for a missing dog, a mother and her puppies." Eli frowned at my words. "You think someone's trying to take them back?" "I'm not sure what to make of this," I said, running my fingers through my hair. "It feels like someone intentionally left that last puppy on my porch for me to find, and there's been someone sneaking around my property at night. Clearly, there's a reason behind all this." Eli let out a sigh and reached for his clipboard, flipping through the pages before shaking his head. "There haven't been any missing dog reports in the past month. No calls about a stray mother dog either." He paused, weighing his words. "Do you think this is more than just someone abandoning the puppies? That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out." As I walked out of the clinic, I felt more questions arise than I had answers. If no one was searching for Rosie, then who had left her puppy behind? And what was their motive? My next stop was the sheriff's office. I didn't have high expectations, but it seemed wise to report the odd happenings around my place. The deputy at the front desk barely looked up when I entered. "How can I assist you?" I laid everything out straightforwardly: strange footprints, an unlatched gate, and a puppy left in the middle of the night. It sounded almost absurd as I spoke, but as I continued, the deputy's bored look began to change. "You live near Mill Creek Road, right?" he inquired, leaning forward slightly. I stiffened at the question. "Yes." The deputy exchanged glances with another officer beside him, then lowered his voice. "A couple of weeks ago, we received a call from an old farmer in that area. He mentioned seeing someone lurking near his barn late at night, but by the time we arrived, the person had disappeared. We didn't give it much thought, assumed it was just a drifter." He tapped his pen on the desk. "Do you think this is connected to your dogs?" "I don't believe in coincidences," I replied, crossing my arms. He nodded slowly. "We'll send someone to patrol your area tonight. It might turn out to be nothing, but just to be safe, keep your doors locked. And please, call us if you notice anything unusual." While that wasn't exactly comforting, at least it was something. By the time I arrived home, the sky had grown dark. The house was quiet, yet as soon as I stepped onto the porch, Rosie barked sharply from inside. I froze for a moment, then hurried to unlock the door. Once I stepped inside, it was clear something was off. Rosie wasn't with the puppies. She stood near the back door, her body tense and her ears drawn back. Following her gaze, I noticed dirt spread across the floor near the entrance. The door had been locked when I left, but someone had been inside. One of the puppies was missing. I felt a rush of anxiety as I looked around the room. The other puppies were still tucked in their makeshift bed, but there was clearly one missing. My stomach tightened at the thought of the little pup with the red ribbon. Rosie, the mother dog, whined softly and walked toward the back door, clearly anxious. My mind raced, trying to catch up with what was happening. The door was locked and all the windows were secure. Yet someone had somehow managed to slip inside, take the tiny puppy, and disappear without a trace. I quickly grabbed my shotgun from the wall and stepped outside into the chilly night. The wind was stronger now, rustling the trees and making every shadow seem suspicious. I moved swiftly, my boots crunching on the dirt as I scanned the yard, my breath quickening with each passing moment. Then I noticed some movement near the tree line. Without thinking, I ran toward it, holding onto my gun tightly, my heart racing as I closed the gap. Whatever, or whoever, it was began to flee, darting through the brush and vanishing into the woods. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, my voice slicing through the silence of the night. But they didn't stop. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches scratching at my arms. My breaths came in quick gasps, and the beam of my flashlight jerked around, catching brief glimpses of movement, a flash of clothing, a footprint in the dirt. This person knew the woods well and moved quickly. Before I could catch up, they were out of reach. I finally paused, breathing heavily, cursing under my breath. The only sounds were the wind rustling in the trees and a distant owl hooting. Then, I heard it, a faint, sad whimper. I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was nearby. Taking cautious steps forward, I moved my flashlight beam across the underbrush, and then I spotted it, the red ribbon. The little puppy lay just off the path, curled up and trembling. It seemed that whoever had taken it hadn't gotten far before leaving it behind. But why would someone go to the trouble of sneaking onto my property to take just one puppy and then abandon it here in the woods? I crouched down and gently scooped the shivering pup into my arms. Its breathing was shallow, and its little body felt colder than it should have. It was weak, too weak for my comfort. There was no time to waste. I turned and rushed back to the house, where Rosie greeted me at the door, her eyes wide with worry. As I knelt down, she sniffed the pup I had rescued and let out a soft, relieved sound before gently licking its tiny head. But my own relief didn't come just yet. This situation wasn't over. Someone had entered my home, taken this pup, and led me into the woods on purpose. Now they were aware that I was willing to pursue them. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Rosie instinctively curled around the puppies, keeping the one with a red ribbon close to her side. Her demeanor was protective, and her eyes darted toward the door every time the wind creaked. I sat in my chair with a shotgun resting across my lap, mirroring her watchful gaze. Whoever had invaded my house had done so quietly. They had not forced their way in or broken anything. This suggested they were either familiar with my locks or knew how to pick them. And if that was the case, that meant they could return. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed. It was Eli. "Are you serious, Jake? Someone got inside your house?" His voice was tight, sharper than usual, filled with anger. "Yeah," I replied, rubbing my temple. "They took the smallest pup, but I found it in the woods." A moment of silence passed before Eli said, "This isn't just about the dogs, is it?" I understood what he meant. This wasn't a random act. It was intentional, a message. "No, it's not," I admitted with a deep breath. Eli sighed heavily. "After you left, I did some digging. There aren't any missing dog reports, but I found something else. Remember that dog-fighting ring that was taken down a few towns over a while back?" I frowned. "Yeah, what about it?" "They never caught everyone involved. Some people just disappeared and went underground. If this situation is linked," he paused, lowering his voice. "Jake, if Rosie was part of that, or if these pups belong to someone still in that world." I clenched my jaw. "You're saying someone wants them back?" I believe someone thinks those dogs are theirs." His words weighed heavily on my mind. I glanced at Rosie, who lay curled around her puppies, ears twitching even in her sleep. If she had come from that dark world and escaped with her litter, it was clear someone wanted her back, and they wouldn't stop until they got her. I stood, gripping the shotgun tighter. "Then they're in for a fight." Eli muttered a curse under his breath. "Don't do anything reckless." I didn't respond. Instead, I ended the call, secured all the doors, and started checking the windows. If they wanted to return, that was fine. I was ready for them. This night felt different. The air was unnaturally still, and the woods were silent, as if everything around me was holding its breath. I settled near the door with my shotgun loaded, leaving the house dark except for the soft glow of the embers in the fireplace. Rosie was alert as well, curled protectively around her puppies, her ears twitching at every tiny noise. She sensed something, just as I did. I couldn't predict how they would show up, whether they'd knock, try to sneak in again, or come armed with something worse. But I knew they were on their way. The footprints, the missing puppy, their attempts to push my limits, it all pointed to this moment. Then, just past midnight, I heard it, a slow, deliberate creak from the porch boards. Not the wind, not some animal. Someone was out there. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, feeling adrenaline rush through me. A shadow passed by the window, barely distinguishable in the moonlight. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They were waiting and listening, almost challenging me to make the first move. Rosie let out a low growl, subtle yet full of warning, but it was enough. A reply came almost immediately, a knock, soft yet purposeful, as if the person outside wanted to remind me that the situation wasn't resolved. I stayed still, my muscles coiled tight. Another knock followed, and then came a voice, deep and rough, unmistakably male. "Come on out, friend. Just here for what's mine." The nonchalance in his tone only ignited my anger. I looked at Rosie. She stayed with the puppies, but her eyes glimmered with an instinctual awareness. She recognized that voice. Positioning myself to the side of the door, out of direct sight, I forced my voice to remain calm. "There's nothing here for you." He chuckled slowly, humorlessly. "That's where you're mistaken." I could hear his boots scrapping against the wood as he shifted, testing me, trying to assess if I would fold and let him take Rosie and her pups without a struggle. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "I'm giving you one chance," I said firmly, my voice low. "Turn around, head back to your truck, and don't come back." A heavy silence hung in the air between us, palpable and tense. Then came a sigh, breaking the stillness. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way," someone muttered. I heard the door handle rattle, followed by a solid thud, someone testing the door's strength with their shoulder. I took my shotgun in hand, moving cautiously toward the window, prepared for whatever might happen next. Another forceful hit landed on the door, but it held firm. Suddenly, I spotted a second figure inching toward the side of the house, making its way to the back door. My heart raced as I rushed around the corner, just in time to see a shadow reaching for the latch. I didn't think twice. My shotgun was raised before he even realized I was there. "Go ahead, try it," I warned him. He froze, his hands lifting slightly in surprise, caught off guard. The first man must have sensed the shift in tension, as the knocking at the front door suddenly stopped. For a moment, we all stood still. Then the first man spoke again, his voice tense. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I stepped forward, allowing the porch light to illuminate my face. "And neither do you." In that moment, an understanding passed between us. We both knew this wasn't going to end easily. He had come expecting an easy target, someone who would back down at the first sign of trouble. But he quickly realized I wasn't that person. A long, charged silence followed, broken only by a sharp whistle that cut through the night. The second figure slowly backed away, fading into the shadows. Moments later, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel, a truck door slamming shut, and the sound of tires kicking up dirt as they sped off down the road. I remained in position, watching the fading red glow of the taillights until I was sure they were gone. Then I lowered my shotgun. Beside me, Rosie let out a deep breath, not a whimper or a growl, just a release of tension, as if sensing the immediate danger had passed. I turned back toward the house, exhaling slowly. I had managed to get through this moment, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time they'd come looking for trouble. After that night, the house took on a new feeling. The air inside, once filled with restless uncertainty, now felt heavy, clinging to both the walls and the silence. Rosie stayed close to her puppies, curled around them, but now there was a different look in her eyes as she watched me. There was no suspicion or hesitation left. She had witnessed what I was willing to do to keep them safe. I kept the shotgun near the door, locked every window, and bolstered the latch at the back. The next morning, Eli arrived, glanced at me, and shook his head. "So what's the plan now?" he asked while placing a bag of supplies for the puppies on the table. "Are you going to call the sheriff again?" I paused before responding. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to do next. The men who had come earlier hadn't returned, but that didn't guarantee they wouldn't. If Rosie was connected to something dangerous, something unresolved, we might still be at risk. But calling the sheriff wouldn't change that. Out here, the law has its limitations, and people like those who came for Rosie were well aware of that. Instead of answering Eli's question, I crouched down and gently stroked the smallest pup, the one wearing a red ribbon. It had managed to survive against the odds, smaller and weaker than its siblings, but resilient enough to keep going. Rosie licked the tiny creature's head and nudged my hand as if expressing her quiet gratitude. I exhaled slowly. "I'm not sending them away," I finally said. "Not unless it's to a safe place, a permanent one." Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So you're keeping them?" I let his question linger, feeling its weight settle in my chest. I hadn't planned for this. I never thought of myself as someone who could take in a family of strays and make things work. But the silence that filled the house before they arrived, the way that loneliness stretched endlessly, there was no going back to that now. I looked at Rosie, noticing how much she had come to trust me. At that moment, I understood. "I guess I am," I replied. Eli gave a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "What a way to get a dog." I smirked, scratching behind Rosie's ears. She picked me first. The puppies wiggled together, their tiny bodies radiating warmth as their futures remained unwritten. While this wasn't how I envisioned life unfolding, and while shadows still lingered at the edges of this story, one thing was clear: I wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. Rescue isn't just about feeding a stray, it's often about building trust. It means recognizing that healing takes time, that scars don't disappear overnight, and that those who have faced the most hardship can find it hardest to believe they are safe at last. Rosie came to my porch seeking help, but perhaps in some way, I needed her just as much as she needed me. This story involves not just a single dog or a man. It highlights the decisions we face when unexpected situations arise. It emphasizes the importance of standing up for those who cannot advocate for themselves, and reminds us that family can often be defined by our choices rather than just our lineage. If this narrative struck a chord with you, prompting thoughts about our duty to the animals that rely on us, I invite you to continue exploring these themes. There are countless tales waiting to be shared and lives in need of rescue. Perhaps you might encounter a similar moment in your own life where a choice could alter everything. To hear more stories that are genuine, heartfelt, and thought-provoking, consider subscribing. Sharing this video with someone who could benefit from it might spark inspiration in unexpected ways. If you've ever rescued an animal or faced a comparable situation, feel free to share your story in the comments. Let's keep this dialogue alive. After all, the ones we save sometimes have a way of saving us in return.